Sorry for the awkward setup here in this room, but it's so good to see all of you here again. Thank you so much for making the time on your really busy calendars. We got a lot out of the work session that we had a few months ago with you, and we know that this will be great. You guys know so much about rezoning and the rezoning criteria that we really value your input on this topic. And we agree with a lot of what we heard at our last work session. The current criteria can be ambiguous, and this is a great opportunity to improve that. There are also, like, we had a lot of great discussion and heard from you, there's some routes that are exclusionary and racist in some of this criteria, and so it's really important with this project to address that. We're really excited to continue that conversation with you today. The team working on this has put a lot of thought into dividing it up into 3 work sessions, so this is the second one. And there'll be one more. Because the criteria are complex and there's a lot of them, we're breaking it into pieces. So just know we're kind of going to ask you to focus on a couple of criteria today, but there's more coming very soon in the 3rd work session. And also wanted to mention that we're recording the meeting today. Is it already going?
It is already.
Yeah, recording is live. So we're recording all of this. And then before we turn it over to the team, wanted to welcome, we're very lucky today, we have our executive director of PCPD. Anish Kumar is here, and he's just going to say a couple of words and listen for at least part of the discussion. So thank you so much for making time to be here today.
No, thanks, Sarah. So I'm actually glad to be here and meet everybody and hear your thoughts. This project is a great opportunity to improve our rezoning process. I know Sarah and her team has put a lot of work into this. So I just want to thank them very much for that. And with that, I'll say over to
Great. I'm Brandon Schaefer, everybody. Senior City Planner and Project Manager for Advanced Equity Rezoning. Let's get started. So as Sarah mentioned, we're very excited to build on the foundation and the initial proposed changes that we presented to you guys in January. We're going to do a quick recap of that meeting, and then we're going to continue our discussion on public health safety and general welfare. Then Rob's going to talk about our recommended updates to justifying circumstances, and we'll have some Q&A between each of those sections and then end with next steps. On that note, also wanted to re-report out what Sarah said about exploring a 3rd joint working session for these groups to meet. And so with that in mind, we'd really like to keep your comments and input focused on the issues that we're bringing up today. So what did we talk about in January? When we presented these initial changes, I think there was general agreement on removing 2 of our criteria, the uniformity of district regulations and the Denver zoning code intent statement criteria. And the group was also comfortable with moving land for community need not anticipated at the time of plan adoption out of our plan consistency criterion. And today, Rob's going to present what we think that fits better. The area where we had less consensus was how do we address public health, safety, and general welfare. Therefore, we're going to focus a lot of our discussion today on that single criterion. So what did we hear from you all about this criterion? We heard that this is language that's very dated from the 1920s. It was initially just set up as a rationale for cities to plan and regulate land uses. It's not intended to be a rezoning review criterion. And we all know that it has historic racist and exclusionary roots. So best practice would be removing it completely, and that would also help us with the key goal of this project, which is to remove ambiguity in the criteria we can. This would also help us improve transparency for community members and our applicants, and it would also help us focus our evaluation on adopted plans, which we know have much more robust outreach and engagement processes than individual rezoning cases. We also think that the comments that come up and the concerns that come up in public comment at rezoning hearings can be tied to plan guidance for decision makers. Couple things we heard specifically from these 2 groups. You don't want to do rubber stamps after CPD makes a recommendation. There were some that were split on needing to potentially rework this language, and others that thought we should maybe take it out completely and focus our decision solely on equity. We think that there's also an ability for you guys to use some discretion in your decision making based on the information you get at public comment, and when you're really thinking about the different plans that we have adopted. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Rob so we can talk more about things that we could be pulling out of our plans.
Thanks. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So as Jody mentioned, we want to highlight what we heard about this desire to make decisions based on considerations about equity and the environment. We want to emphasize that there are policies and strategies in our adopted plans that can be used to make decisions that advance both of these goals. This doesn't represent a change, right? So these concepts and the things that we're about to talk to today, and we're about to look at some cases too, some real world examples. This is kind of how the plans can be evaluated today. This is not a change at all. And as part of this process, we also want to acknowledge that we've heard it's really difficult to kind of look through the code and kind of pull pieces out for any individual rezoning. So we're looking at creating a series of guides to help you all as decision makers, as well as to help community members kind of parse through the plans and pull out the most applicable sections. So first, let's talk about equity. Particularly in Blueprint Denver, equity was identified really early on in the process as one of its key community values. This weighed in heavily in how we participate or how we engage with the community, and kind of then went on to be embedded in all of the individual implementation goals, policies, and strategies. So everything that's in the plan really has been reviewed and kind of adopted through this lens of equity. We use these three concepts, this improving access to opportunity, reducing vulnerability to displacement, and expanding housing and jobs diversity, which you're all very familiar with, in order to evaluate equity across the city and over time. But most importantly for our discussion today is that these concepts can and should be part of the evaluation and decision-making process for implementation actions like rezonings. So this slide shows just some examples of how decision makers, you all could really think about equity concepts when making a decision based on the plan guidance, right? So based on those concepts and sometimes the measurements within them, these can be really helpful in evaluating current conditions, considering historical inequities, particularly from one neighborhood to another, and evaluating potential benefits or impacts from a rezoning, considering what new uses or what changes might be occurring between one zone district and the next. So in addition to equity, the city's adopted plans help you all consider environmental impacts. Comprehensive Plan 2040 highlights environmental resiliency as one of its core vision elements to provide clear guidance for how Denver should grow more sustainably. It's well studied that energy usage, greenhouse gas emissions, and carbon footprint can all be tied directly to development density as well as land use patterns. And cities that are more densely populated and neighborhoods that are more densely populated produce fewer per capita carbon emissions than less dense communities. That guidance and that thinking has all been already incorporated for the most part in the guidance that might have an increase in entitlement in one area versus another. So again, similar to the equity concepts, these are kind of these larger ideas, but these policies have all kind of gone into the specific implementation strategies, the future place type maps, and future neighborhood context maps that you look at on a weekly basis. So Blueprint Denver takes this guidance one step further and really tells us to apply this and consider environmental justice when considering how a rezoning contributes to the development in one neighborhood to create that complete neighborhood where all Denverites have access to green amenities and open spaces. So now we'll take a look at the series of examples to apply these concepts.
Yes, so to demonstrate how you all could use these ideas and recommendations in our plans to address this public health safety general welfare issue, we want to walk through some recent examples of cases where you could maybe take this into consideration. So keep in mind that there's very few rezoning denials on an annual basis by city council, and that usually that they're denied based on concerns related to a specific development project. So as we go deeper into our plan guidance, this likely wouldn't change CPD's recommendation in these cases. But again, we feel it's more important to, in best practice for decision makers to make their decisions based on adopted plans, which have the most community input, and not use dated language that we know is not intended to be used that way, and that has a racist and exclusionist history. So our first example takes us to a location in Highland where it was custom zoned to only allow for a dentist office, and the applicant proposed a 2-story zone district that allowed a broad range of commercial and residential uses. While that was going through, we did hear feedback from community members that they did not want to allow drive-through uses in their neighborhood. And this proposed zone district would have allowed a drive-through. So what was the outcome in city council's evaluation? They unanimously denied the rezoning using the rationale that drive-through forms and uses do not further the public health, safety, and welfare and are therefore incompatible. They ended by suggesting that the applicant pursue a similar zone district that just doesn't allow drive-throughs and that would have been more appropriate at this location. So city council used public health, safety, and welfare to deny this and had a pretty good argument, but we do think that could be a similar argument made using just our plans. So blueprint land use guidance for this site calls for neighborhood serving, retail, and residential uses. Therefore, you could make an argument that the proposed zone district would have allowed for a higher intensity of uses that are not neighborhood serving. Also, the blueprint street type is residential arterial, which serves primarily residential and small retail nodes. So an argument could be made that that street type does not support auto-oriented commercial uses. Hopefully that's starting to make sense. So we're going to have a second example here. This is focused on a single use again to a broad mix of uses. So in this example, this property was zoned to only allow a single commercial use, which is a bank drive-through facility. And the applicant proposed a mixed use zone district, again allowing a wide range of commercial and residential uses. They took it a step further this time and mentioned that they were proposing to build a gas station. The neighbors became aware of this and were very concerned about air quality and traffic impacts from said proposed gas station. So city council evaluated this and majority of them voted to deny. They argued that rezoning to a district that allows for a gas station doesn't further the public health, safety, and general welfare of the community. That's fair, but I think we could also remove public health, safety, and general welfare from this example and focus on our plans to make the same argument. Blueprint, again, has a number of climate change goals, guiding growth and responding to climate change, protecting our natural and environment and natural resources. Therefore, you could argue that redevelopment that allows auto-oriented uses does not help the city achieve our climate goals, such as encouraging housing near high-capacity transit. And also, we have a land use policy here that says that we should be ensuring an active, pedestrian-friendly environment in our centers and corridors. And you could allowing for a zone district that has auto-oriented uses and building placement does not contribute to providing that pedestrian-friendly environment and a community corridor. So in conclusion, you could use the plans to argue that the proposed zoning is not consistent with adopted plan guidance, getting us to a better place than using the outdated public health, safety, and general welfare criteria. I also wanted to remind in summary that the zoning code does require staff to make a recommendation. And I did say that in CPD's evaluation, we probably would still be recommending approval for these cases, but we really did want to go through all of the relevant plan guidance. And we think that we can do a better job of that in our staff reports and presentations to you all. So maybe there is an opportunity for us to pull out some of that plan guidance for you and give you what you need to make an argument without using public health, safety, and general welfare and that problematic language. With that, we would like to start a little bit of a discussion.
So as we were talking about earlier, when you were all walking in, this is through Mentimeter, which is what we used last time we met. So if anyone hasn't already, you can scan this QR code or go onto the Mentimeter website, or sorry, menti.com, and then enter this code, and this will bring you to the survey. And if you can, go ahead and hit that thumbs up. And it's hard to see on here; it's blocked, but I've got a count on how many people have hit it. So even if you hit it multiple times, it still just counts once. I'm always compelled to do the same thing. Just hammer it. We've got 17 in now.
It says waiting for presenter.
Yeah, perfect. That's good. That's what it should say. When you're there, you're all set. Okay, so we'll jump in first to the next, the first question, right? So as a quick reminder, this is just a straw poll. This is just to kind of really initiate some of the discussion, and then we'll get into more open-ended questions and listening to your responses here. All of these responses are anonymous, so your name is not attached to how you do answer. Unless you want it to be, then you can come in discussion later and tell us exactly what you said. And then there will be time for discussion following this. So So first, just kind of look for an initial quick take. Do the adopted plans, can the adopted plans be used to make decisions to replace public health, safety, and general welfare? So really, we're kind of measuring, is there enough language in the plans that can be used to make decisions and kind of have some discretion, listen to public comment, consider things that have happened since the adoption of plans to make an evaluation.
And I will invite folks on either end of this to please, Council President, can we get a cue perhaps?
Yeah, I'll start taking them. All right, I've got Sawyer, Hines, Gilmore, and Jordan. Thank you.
And also, I just wanted to add that we do have a lot of folks in the room and want to get as many ideas as we can. So if you can keep your responses to about 90 seconds, that'd be great.
Should I start? Am I ready? Am I up? Okay. Hi, sorry I was late. So I think that we could use the adopted plans in order to have them be consistent if our adopted plans were correct. But in many cases, they are not. And in over 50% of the city, they don't exist at all except for Blueprint. So while I see what you're trying to do here and recognize that there is a world in which it would be successful, our plans have to be correct and exist first. Right now, there are several places where they are incorrect, including that example you just gave on Geneva. And over 50% of the city doesn't have a plan at all. So like, I hear you, but not today. Look at that, that was short.
That was great.
What do you mean by correct? Just like.
Yeah, so
Diane says in the
Blueprint is
letter.
actually wrong. And for that parcel, the recommendation from Blueprint is wrong. And there's a couple of different reasons for that. And also, like, there's an entire planning process we're working on right now to get rid of the community corridor designation entirely.
Gotcha.
So like, there are several things with Blueprint about that Geneva site specifically that are just 100% wrong.
Okay,
And so using adopted plans that are wrong for that site doesn't work particularly well. So I think we would need to clean up what we already have before we started using something else. I will also say, I have seen CPD change plans specifically to fit other developments that were not consistent with the plan, Pepsi being the most recent, I think, and most obvious example. And so it's very difficult for me to trust that if we're only using adopted plans, that those plans are not being in further to someone else's business interests like Pepsi was.
You, Councilman Hines and Councilman Gilbert.
Thank you. So I like to get along, which is really weird for this job to like want to get along. And for me, public health, safety, and welfare is something that is just like your opinion, man. Whereas inconsistency with adopted plans, like whoever the plan reviewer was, is just wrong. So now I'm saying the subject matter expert, the planner, was just, it's just factually incorrect. And whereas the, public health, safety, and welfare is a matter of opinion. So it's easier for me to to disagree without being disagreeable by using public health, safety, and welfare rather than you misinterpreted your own plans. But that's my.
Okay. Jordan.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, sorry. Gilmore. No, I'm sorry.
Along kind of the similar lines, but I remember here, I would like to know what the demographics are of the Denver citizens who commented on all of the plans. Because I remember hearing that Blueprint was majority white Denverites, and it was a high percentage. I mean, it was off the charts. I'll try to go find the email correspondence, et cetera, but it's hard if our plans are more, and that's not surprising, especially given when some of these plans were brought out to community, et cetera. And so I'd like to validate who contributed to these plans to make sure that we're even working with equitable documents in making these decisions.
Yeah, so ranked not all the way on the right side, but toward the right side. I do think that it could largely replace it, although I guess my overall feeling is that it doesn't remove the risk of being arbitrary and capricious and making it our opinion, using the environmental sustainability sort of clauses in blueprint. While they're good, we are not environmental scientists either. And ranking one versus, one project that's a drive-through versus another, all drive-throughs are environmentally insensitive because they promote car culture, right? And we're saying, well, this one, yeah, it's probably a little bit more climatically bad than this one. It's, there's still a risk that we're using our opinion. And I feel like we have this collective group probably has a pretty good sense of what is responsibly sustainable and what is not, at least on the far end of the spectrum. Maybe similarly with equity, but there is still, some gray area there, I'd say.
Okay, I've got Angel, Gosha, Cashman, Alvidrez, and then Sarah.
Okay, so I kind of put it in the middle, but the truth is, my answer doesn't fit on the chart because I believe this is a false binary dilemma. Neither are good options for this, and we need some new criteria or specifically around equity. That's it.
Yeah, Gosha.
Yeah, I want to go back to the examples that you presented and the arguments. I think the challenge is that both Main Street and mixed use zone allow both drive-throughs and gas stations. We really don't have, we have goals for achieving mixed use environment and pedestrian mobility and non-car oriented mobility, but we don't have districts that actually describe that. So I think either case, the arguments are somewhat ambiguous, and I think the outcome of the conversation was really a result of complaint and opposition from the neighborhood, not so much based in argument. So I agree with both Jordan and Jill that I think we need both better districts that actually achieve the outcomes that we're hoping for, and also better criteria for arriving at those conclusions.
Councilman Cashman, then Alvidrez, and then Sarah.
Thank you. I just feel we're underplaying the climate portion of this. I mean, the statement that you didn't put on your slide, that's, I think, page 14 of Blueprint, the last sentence says how we plan our city can help us reduce our drain on resources and reduce Denver's carbon footprint to eliminate our collective contribution to the climate change crisis. That commitment must be our overarching guide. So I understand, Jordan, what you're saying, but I think we need to figure that out, because if we don't take it seriously, if we think we're having a problem with immigration now, when we start getting climate immigration, there's one in the middle of the country and there's sea rise on the coast, we're seriously in a problem. And I'm out of a mind, as hard as climate is to wrap your mind around what is our responsibility when entire countries aren't doing what they should. I think we need to do what we should. So that's right. So that wraps into somehow, I like health, safety, and welfare. It can be reworded, but I think that flexibility is good.
Alvidrez, Sarah, then Sarah.
Yes, so I think that makes a lot of sense. One thing I'm thinking of too, I think we think of this in ways of like why we wouldn't approve things, but it could also be why we would approve things. I know recently we saw something in District 3 just the other night where clearly there's upzoning to allow more people to stay in an industrial area. Clearly that industrial area, according to Blueprint, we want to phase out residential from this industrial area. But in reality, for the public health and welfare, we want to add some beds to one of those facilities. And so I do think that the plans may not be accurate. They're just not always right. And things change. For example, the mobile home thing that we're working on, like at one point we wanted to get rid of mobile homes. Now we're trying to preserve them. And do we have to wait 18 months to create a new plan before that rezoning can happen? So that's just my thoughts.
I'll just add on to that, I think if there is good focus on the plans, I think that provides the general guidance on public health, safety and welfare, like do we want industrial versus residential? So I think that kind of provides that general protection. But then when we're looking at rezoning itself, there should be no zone district that doesn't further public health, safety and welfare. So I think it's looking at what are the issues in our zone district ourselves. And is there updates that we need to make there? But I think it all kind of still speaks to each other.
Thank you. I agree. I don't think our zone districts match what our built environment is. And I think we need to use those three concepts that we have in Blueprint Denver and create new zone districts that are updated with the climate that we have and the pedestrian walkability that Denver wants and the density that Denver wants. These off-the-shelf zone districts don't provide the outcomes in neighborhoods. And it's interesting that the two examples that we have don't have neighborhood plans and never have had a neighborhood plan. The one in West Highland, that's one of Denver's original neighborhoods, and it's never had a neighborhood plan. And it's 10 years out from getting a neighborhood plan, and it has seen some of the most egregious redevelopment with slot homes in Denver, in my opinion, and somebody who lives there. So it's hard to use the two no's that don't have any guidance other than a really, really high level document to say, yes, you're supposed to go into this zone district when our zone districts don't match the built environment of what our constituents want. And I think that's what we at City Council are listening to, is our constituents are like, we don't want that, we want more. And so we need to do different, we need to have different zone districts that actually comply with the concepts in Blueprint Denver.
Melissa,
So agree with the zone district comments. And then we'll get on to that.
The only other thing is I have concerns, like I agree with what you said, Jordan, and also that is what causes me concern. Public health, safety, general welfare obviously has an origin that we talked about last time. However, to your point, Councilwoman Gilmore, about who actually put input into these plans, I think it is very dangerous to treat plans as if they are objective. There is no way to make this decision objectively. Like, we need a way to build in decision-making criteria that allow us to make non-objective decision, because it's not like how we build this criteria, who made the plan, like it's not actually an objective process. This is the only place where that is acknowledged in the planning decision-making process. It is flawed, but that doesn't mean we should get rid of it or replace it with something and pretend that like there's no place for like nuance or opinion in this process, because like it just requires that. So I would advocate for not doing this and for finding a better solution, finding better criteria. Like, it's not going to be perfect, but I do think it's dangerous to talk about this as if there is an objective answer, because they're just, it's not going to be one.
Romero, Campbell, Gilmore, and then Sawyer.
Thank you, and I think this builds off of the other comments, but it's one thing to have goals, but if we're not measuring what we're trying to achieve getting there, I think that's a missing piece that I'm seeing. In addition to that, if you, to your point about who participated in the survey, not only the demographics, but geographically, who was represented in that area. But I think that if we are looking at where we are trying to go and what standards we have or what we're looking at for each different neighborhood, we do need to have some sort of goal that we're trying to achieve. Otherwise, or maybe there is some measurement or what are we looking at that tells us that we're getting there. That's what I would like to see.
No, I was just gonna say, I'm still new here, trying to learn all of these things and terminology, but the one thing I guess I could say, just since July doing these, and looking at something like public health, safety, and general welfare, is there's really no definition of that as far as, and that's what I was asking Councilwoman Gilmore, just to verify that fact. And so whether or not this is being utilized or utilizing the plans, there needs to be some definition that everyone is hopefully everyone is agreeing upon, right? And that includes community, that includes, planning, CPD and planning board. Like, how do we come to that place? Because if we don't have a definition, then it is arbitrary. And we're all just kind of taking in whatever our own defined thing, definition of public health, safety, and general welfare is based on our own experience. That's what we're taking into consideration. We're not what is the actual definition.
I think that that's an important first step, and the subjective nature of it would be very helpful, because if we try to cookie cutter it, like Councilman Cashman's district is built out. It has been built out for decades. District 11 is not built out. I'm still tracking medians and traffic signals, and we're trying to get our first. And so from an equity lens, for public health and safety, that's super concerning, because we're not even a complete neighborhood to be built out. And so we would always be at a disadvantage or losing out on what we might need if we try to have it so prescribed. And that's what we're doing right now. And it's not working, because we're maybe never going to get those gyms or gathering spaces or other healthy food options, et cetera, that we've been waiting for, if we don't allow for that subjective nature to close the equity gaps.
But I'll go to two new voices. We'll go Rachel and
So I going back to Councilman Sawyer's point on neighborhoods not having plans, I think that's something definitely to think through. But everything else, to me, that I've heard, from climate to like grocery stores, all of that to housing, all of that is in blueprint. And so I guess for me, the racist foundations of this language and the way that it's very, very, very frequently applied that way today, in my mind, I think that eliminating it is a step towards equity, acknowledging the basis of why that language was created and how it is applied today matters. And I think that if that means we need to better embed equitable language around public health, safety, and general welfare into blueprint, then let's do that. If we need to make that language more robust, then let's do that. But let's not continue on with language that has been bad from the start. And I would say 8 out of 10 times the people testifying today are using it in that same way.
Councilman Watson.
2 points. Obviously, Rachel and I have been discussing Cole never having a neighborhood plan. Clayton, Mary, never having a neighborhood plan. So I would say my district, I think we have, and I keep saying 1.5, maybe 2 plans. One of us is South Park Hill. So we're looking at the plans as to what that is that we're going to review, and that's what community members coming before us or us going for a community. That's what we're highlighting. They know that they have not been prioritized in a way that they feel, and there is great development. I mean, the planning team presented District 9 has the most development. We have 1.5 plans. But we're being built out. And so it's a lot of struggle and fight. And as Rachel added, public health safety, we know the underpinnings of the kind of the racist ideology around where that came from. However, sometimes community can flip that coin as well and use public health and safety to kind of block a little bit of what the higher level blueprint is kind of delivering. They can speak to the grocery store missing and lay out that, hey, it doesn't describe this zone as available for that, but I think we should be able to add public health and safety and grocery stores included. So I think the language, the subjectivity is something, and so I gave it like a low 2 and point something, but I think the subjectivity is needed. because community members without plans, and we're expediting, but without plans, need some level of subjectivity to communicate back and push back on what the global blueprint is requiring.
Councilman Sawyer, then Angel,
I don't think Angel has gone yet, so she can.
No, I do.
Okay, sorry. I just want to build kind of off of the conversation here as well and just ask what our goal is in equity and rezoning, because we in changing this criteria, because we are for sure talking about the actual zoning piece of it, right? But I also think that we need to acknowledge that our residents, many of whom do not understand zoning, many of whom find it extremely complicated or have no historical context to draw from at all, are coming out to, speak either in support or against a proposed rezoning. And they are not going to be able to speak to we are not going to be able to take their comments into account. The vast majority of them are not going to be able to speak to the context, the different things that come along with zoning, because it's incredibly complicated and it's taken us all a very, very long time to really wrap our minds around it. So I also just want to bring into the conversation that part of this is we need to think about and consider how we are presenting this to our residents and allowing them to access it. Because if they are coming to stand up at a hearing and talking about health, safety, and welfare, that is something that they can, and I say this as a person who I will acknowledge has very many racist residents who show up to all the time. We all saw what went down last week at the Hale ADU rezoning. So, but I do think that the language, whatever it is that we choose, has to also be accessible to the public for them to be able to have their voices heard and have us take that into consideration. Because if it's just straight zoning, there are very few residents who are going to be able to really engage in the rezoning process anymore. Just a thought.
Let's go to Mary and then Jill. Mary doesn't talk to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I really appreciate all the points that are being raised, and I agree with a lot of the sentiment. The other thing that I run into, and I don't know if you guys run into this as well, but sometimes I feel like conformance with plan guidance to me is a little bit like theologians arguing about the Bible. And it's like, can I find the part that justifies where I'm coming from? So it's like, conformance with plan guidance is already in there. It's not going away, regardless of the fact that not all of our neighborhoods have specific plans, but there's also a lot of ambiguity built within that. And I really agree, like, I would love to get away from the racist roots of general health, or public health, safety, and general welfare. And I'm wondering if there's a path forward that kind of blends these approaches where we are conforming with plan guidance, but like, let's take it super high level. We have 6 guiding principles in Blueprint Denver. Does it advance those? And we can put those out to the public. They're values that, despite the imperfect engagement that went into Blueprint Denver, hopefully represent our collective vision for the city. And that could be a way that we could retain the nuance and sort of the decision-making, because they're going to be weighted differently in different development applications and in different parts of the city. It's not as simple as 3 things, but 6 feels manageable. And it's a way to connect more residents into the plan as like sort of a small bite of the apple. So, thank you.
Yeah, so to answer the question about what are we trying to accomplish, as far as I see it, this looking at equity and rezoning, it should remove barriers for communities that have experienced inequity, young people of color, low income, other communities that experience inequities such that they can access housing, commerce, wealth building opportunities the same as everybody else. If we are thinking of something different, it'd be great to know. With that being said, the plans, all of them that are created, have worked to take other perspectives into account, as many as they could get out and crunch together. And there will never be absolutes because everyone has not been included. if we are working to truly achieve what I just talked about as a goal that I just made up, that I'm assuming, I'm just assuming we're working on that premise, then it's imperative to ask questions. I mean, language is important. But it's not as important as outcomes and whatever being stated being effective in accomplishing goals. Language is often twisted and used. It sounds good to appease, but I hope we're not talking about appeasement. And so, for instance, if we are looking, we have in front of us a potential rezoning, asking a series of questions, such as who is impacted positively by this outcome, who will be impacted negatively, what is the current state of this community, what's the historic background of racist or inequitable practices. And then you break it down to the essentials, because as I just said, nothing is, it's not cookie cutter, one size doesn't fit all. And if 1,000 people gave input for a plan, that leaves out another, whatever, 600,000. And so we have to have some questions that we get to, aside from saying this plan is more absolute than that, or this, basic welfare and all of this. It always boils down to for whom? For whom is this meet the health, safety, and welfare of? Most often it's the majority. And so if we don't ask those questions about how does this impact the minority or the most, those that are treated most inequitably, we're not going to really get to equity.
Thank you for that. I'll just offer my comments as well. And I think, Angel, you're hitting on, I think, where I'm at. Applicants get an equity analysis when they come through that has no hook to it, right? It has nothing that says, given what you know now, how does your project propose to address anything in what you've seen here? And then they come through and say, I have no plan, I have no architect, but I want 12 stories at this location that's currently a parking lot or a car dealership. And it's really difficult to look at that application and go, how do we even have a conversation? You're getting something at the minimum, an immediate land value increase. When we give you this, we have no idea what's coming back to this neighborhood. If they're gonna get a single story storefront or if they're gonna get a 12 or 16 story apartment building. And that's, I think, becomes the city's de facto position of good, right? That whatever they build is going to be good coming out of our form-based code. That's, I think, for us at the council level, a really difficult thing to talk about. When I look at Sun Valley, Villa Park, like all of these neighborhoods that will be facing those kinds of questions. So I have a really hard time letting go of something that is the only thing that I can really reach into for how does this achieve equity for this corridor, for this neighborhood. And there is an element of cherry picking other pieces of blueprint in order to make that argument that become really difficult, I think, on our end to kind of just tease apart a little bit. So I'm also on the more disagree side of just let's get rid of it until I feel like there's something there that feels more appropriate, that feels like guidance, that is also consistent with what we're wanting out of the whole community conversation. Yeah, Rachel.
I think you just touched on something really interesting, which is at the heart of this is that our form-based code makes it really hard to navigate these conversations about what we actually want, whether that's from a design perspective in Jefferson Park or an access to health and food perspective in many parts of our city. And so, I struggle also when we kind of give community this false idea. Like if they show up and testify in favor of a rezoning,
and, you know, there's this beautiful rendering or not. And they believe, they're going to get X, Y, Z out of it, whether it's a grosser or, certain level of design or whatever. And that's not actually the case. And I think that's where I also struggle with this language, is that it gives community a false idea of what they're showing up in and either testifying in favor of or against, which really what they're testifying in favor of, like this big bucket that may get this outcome or may get this outcome. And once it's approved, the city doesn't have any control over what's delivered. And so that's where I also come back, that it's a little hard for me to, when folks come in and give their time and care deeply about something, but what we're delivering is not what they're showing up testifying about 99% of the time.
Yeah, I think when we talk about equity, we really should be talking about outcomes, right? But zoning is not outcome. Zoning is the basis. It's like there's a bucket and there's a bunch of forms and a bunch of uses, and some are good and some are bad. And we really don't even know what the actual use implemented outside is going to be, much less the outcome of implementation of the use. But I'm also hesitant of going with this very prescriptive zoning, which we intentionally steered away from with the form-based code, because the PUDs and the prescriptive zoning really does kind of flare up this community debate about, you know, very specific prescriptive development criteria, which we intentionally went away from, because it depends who shows up to the table, they kind of get placed out. And we created this very customized product, which maybe only 5 people read about.
Just to echo off of that too, I mean, there was a rezoning that happened in my neighborhood and they did promise something and we're working towards it, I think. And so I think that hope doesn't always lead to not getting the exact outcome, but it can lead to something that the community wouldn't have otherwise gotten. I also would echo your comments about, like, what does this have to do directly with equity and what are the biggest needs that we have? And I hope that we will address those in the future. One of them being just having access to the information from home. I missed the notice, I missed the mailer, and like how do we engage community? And I think also what is very valid is when I talk to my constituents in the district, I know that people that live from Denver. They don't live on the west side and they definitely aren't as concerned about gentrification as they are about those. I really appreciate your comment about that, and how it has been used historically. I think in my short time on council, I haven't seen it used that way. I've seen it used more pro equity. That's just my short experience. That's all.
I was just gonna say, if it's an issue of like the actual language, then maybe that's what needs to change, and maybe it's a different factors that are being considered, or different types of wording, I guess. But I will say, to your point, to Council President's point, and even Councilwoman Aviles, and I think Councilwoman Sandoval knows this, right? Having grown up in North Denver, like there is a lack of trust from developers. And I'm just speaking from my own experience, like growing up in that community and seeing what has happened to our community. And that came by way of, you know, some of these processes, right? In the name of development, in the name of, you know, creating new, shiny new things, that equity was not part of that conversation. It was build, build, build. And we're gonna bring all these people here and we're gonna push all these people out. So I can just like speak from that, from my own experience of like having a lack of, like, to be quite frank, a lack of trust in knowing that if you are telling me I'm going to develop and I'm going to have affordable housing and I'm going to have 200-bedroom units, I have to trust that you're going to actually follow through with that. And that's really, really difficult for me to trust on the
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, I think that we have a lot of constituents who trust us, that we're gonna do what's right for our community. And to what Councilmember Alidra said, I think that we have been a bit more intentional about equity than some of our constituents. frankly, and some of the stakeholder developers too. And so, when I first talked about, like, I like general health, safety, and welfare because I can lean into something without pissing you off, I built this plan and I know the plan better than council members do. I've also known I came here to represent the disability community, and there are many times the disability community just cannot engage in, in this process or spend all the time to learn the ins and outs. Like, the plans way better than I do. I know the plans way better than general public. General public probably knows the plans better than people with disabilities. So we have to then if we're going to be intentional, have to somehow use a tool, and if we're using a racist tool, we need to get rid of it, but we still have to have a tool.
Yeah, thank you. Thinking about it, Gosha reminded me about the shift to the form-based code. Looking around the city, I don't know that shift is development that we would like. And I don't want to go back to, all kinds of wild PUDs at the drop of a hat. But, when I'm on the sidewalk committee looking at implementing the fee the voters passed, and everything we're doing, the lawyers are looking at, well, does this maintain the intent of what the voters wanted? And I'm thinking, if we go back to where instead of, we give you 12 stories and you can just take 10 years to decide what you want to do, you give us a plan. And if that changes, we'll decide whether that maintains the intent of what council approved, or you need to go back to the zoning process. It's just ridiculous the way we do this stuff. The level of entitlement we give, people standing there, well, we don't have any plans. We just want the entitlement. And then you're going to sell the property. And like I say, I don't think form-based I think it's left things too wide open. Jesse.
I just have to piggyback on what Cashman said and what Rachel said. I don't think, and what Councilman Gonzalez said, I don't hear trust in my community. And that's why I've had to create overlays. I have more overlays in my council district than any other council district. I just rezoned the whole entire Sunnyside community with an overlay because our form-based code is not producing what the people who pay our salaries want on the ground. And so I have to react to that when I'm hearing from community and they're putting off 5 years worth of work, 6 years worth of work to creating and modifying a zone district because we don't have it. I feel like that's what I was called to do. That's what I was elected to do, is be that conduit to community planning and development and be able to have them bring forward. But I don't want to do any more overlays, to be 100% honest with you. I don't think that Denver should have as many overlays that we have. We have an active street use in Northwest Denver. We have it in West Denver. Now we have it on East Colfax. Now I'm looking at one of the implementations from the Near Northwest plan is to do it in the 4 neighborhoods that just went through the neighborhood plan. Guess what? We should have a zone district that requires active street use. That's ridiculous. That's done. We can't do that. We can't have an overlay anymore because as this council is looking to extend the housing affordability, the EHA, part of the reason why we can't implement EHA when I've gone specifically into zone districts is this complicated zone district in Council District 9. I know I've created some complicated zone districts in Council District 1 where it's being challenged. And so I think that obviously our form-based code is not producing the results we want to see, or we would not have overlays in Cursana Park. We would not have a Powder Highland overlay. I would not have the Sunnyside overlay. I would not have the bungalow overlay. I would not have the active street use overlay. Something's wrong. And we keep trying to look at it through this lens of equity and all of these other factors, which is really important because it's the criteria that all of us in this room vote on. But at the same time, there has to be some type of special process, just like with ADUs. No ADUs were being built, so I kept going to council, to Laura Aldretti and saying, we need an ADU task force to update the ADU form so that we could get ADUs built. And that's what happened. And so sometimes, and it's a lot of work, especially when 20% of our city does not have the same zone districts that we do. So you leave out Green Valley Ranch and Montbello. I think about that oftentimes when we talk about equity. How can we even be sitting here at this table when we created a zoning code in 2010 that left 20% of our community out of the process? And every single time that we make some type of zoning, we have to have a bridge amendment for former chapter 59. So we're not living by blueprint Denver. We're not. Because one of my council members, her whole entire council district hardly has any new zone district. She has more old zoning than new zoning, and that's not equitable when you're thinking about 13 council districts.
Andrew?
Yes, thanks so much. And folks, really appreciate this great conversation. I want to make sure that we have time to at least begin conversation on the next element of what we're hoping to present today, which is talking a little bit about the justifying circumstances in the zoning code. At the end here, we'll actually have a couple of open-ended Menti slides as well that you'll see on Menti. And there'll be opportunities there to continue if you have more to share that you want to add. There'll be plenty of opportunities to continue providing that feedback in writing as well as verbally here.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. So thank you all for that discussion. We hear you loud and clear. We'll be, again, as a reminder, this is the second of, we think, 3 of these meetings, and then it doesn't end there, right? Because we've got to go through the whole adoption process, which comes back to you all again. So this is all very helpful and input that we'll be taking. Okay, so now we'll take a look at the next part of our proposal, which is something new. So we're going to talk through our proposed updates to the justifying circumstances criteria. So as a quick reminder, our justifying circumstances, this is what they look like summarized today. So they apply to all non-legislative rezonings, and one of these must be found in order for any rezoning to be approved, along with all of the other criteria. So just as a quick overview, if the existing zoning was a result of an error or fact, if there are some strange natural characteristic of the land, think steep slope or floodplain, those could justify a need to rezone the property, or if there were changing conditions in the area that might include also a city adopted plan, or the property has retained former chapter 59 zoning, or if the property is establishing an overlay district. These are all things that could justify the need to rezone the property. So our proposal really comes in 2 parts. This first one is that this big change, and we're proposing to restructure the rezoning criteria. The justifying circumstance is an or statement. It would only need to be made or met if the rezoning is not consistent with the adopted plans. So a rezoning request that is consistent with adopted plans would not be a justifying circumstance. The second part of our proposal is a series of adjustments that would be needed in order to really make this work. Changing, moving, and removing some of the existing justifying circumstances. So first, to talk about the or statement component of this. So why use an or statement? So this is really a more common sense location for the provision that already exists in our current rezoning criteria, to support a rezoning for a community need that was not anticipated at the time of plan adoption. Additionally, removing this need to justify the rezoning when a rezoning is already consistent with the adopted plans, it hinders the ability for these rezonings to effectively implement those adopted plans, which is one of their intended goals. And finally, this approach does have a sound legal basis, and it's used by several other Colorado cities, specifically just a few examples along the Front Range, Fort Collins, Boulder, Lakewood, and Bridge. Excuse me. So now we'll take a look at some of the changes that we're looking at making to justifying circumstances. So first, we're looking at retaining the justifying circumstances for errors or mistakes, or changing conditions. So as far as errors go, this could be something like a surveying error that happened in the past and caused a misalignment between the parcels and the zone district boundary. And in some cases, this can cause problems when an existing use goes to get permits to update or change their use in some way. Additionally, changing conditions is a defined circumstance that we're looking at maintaining. And so this would be changing conditions in an area since the plan has been adopted. An example of this might be a transit station or some other large infrastructure project that was developed since the time of that plan adoption. That could justify the need for different guidance, different mix of uses in an area or addition to the city. So we're looking at moving this justifying circumstance for the community need. So again, this currently lives in the consistency with adopted plans criterion. However, it seems to fit better, especially if we're reorganizing as one of these justifying circumstances. So think of these as really significant, unique, extraordinary circumstances that might occur and arise that we need to take action. Most recently, there were some rezonings for hotels that use this as justifying, to justify the rezoning. Since the significant crisis that's happening kind of justified the need to approve a rezoning outside of the general plan guidance. Again, this is different than kind of the general need to rezone a property to allow for more housing, since the plans all acknowledge our lack of housing and how some rights struggle to afford it. So now looking at the justifying circumstances that are supposed to be removed. These are those primarily that just no longer make sense with this reorganization. First being land retaining former Chapter 59 zoning. These properties should, when they're being zoned out of former Chapter 59, should align with the adopted plans. The next are overlay districts. Again, these are typically done in order to implement adopted plans, and also so no longer need a justifying circumstance, since this would not be required if those overlay districts would be consistent with adopted plans. And finally, the unique land characteristics justifying circumstance is no longer needed. And also there are other avenues where applicants can seek relief for these types of issues through variances and other similar processes in the code. So to kind of summarize, this slide shows a proposal of what kind of an overview of our proposal. Again, this is not what it would look like in the code. However, for legislative rezonings, our proposal is that those would need to be consistent with adopted plans. And for non-legislative rezonings, they would either need to be consistent with adopted plans or have one of these justifying circumstances and be able to justify them to the point that they would still be in service of the public good. So this would be, again, error, mistake, changing conditions, or community need not anticipated in the plan. It is the changing conditions and the not anticipated at the time of plan adoption may be one and the same, but we're kind of at that point. We look forward to your feedback on all of this approach. So in order to jump right in, we're going to jump back to Minty. We'll have another quick poll and then look forward to your discussion and more comments from you all.
Go back to the options too. Yeah.
Certainly. And after we go through that first Minty slide, maybe we'll jump back here to have this up on screen. That's probably helpful.
Mine is still on public health.
Yeah.
Okay, that's perfect. That's working correctly. It's just saving. Let's see. Should be changing now. All right. So again, similar one part question. just to kind of gauge temperature. And again, as you can see, just based on the last discussion we had too, right? This kind of gives a general idea, but then we hear a lot more from the discussion that comes out of this. So we'll jump back to that other slide in just a second.
We have a good number of responses. If folks want to start providing any comments.
Sure. I've got Angela and Caitlin. Mine's just a couple of questions. The first, if you go back to that slide, the two second and third options, one was yeah. So the justified circumstance exists. So 2 says changed or changing conditions. And 3 is community need not anticipated in plan. Just curious about the distinction between those two. And overall, how does this advance equity? If this is under the same umbrella, addressing the justified circumstances this way.
Yeah, I could definitely answer that first part. So that the change in changing conditions and community need not anticipated at the time of plan adoption, well, likely they might end up as a single justifying circumstance because they are very similar, right? There's been some change on the ground that can be seen, measured, felt by the community. They say, hey, this is, something's changed and we need an answer that's different and not articulated in the plan. An alternative would be that there was something new that was developed that again changes changes what that community needs. So it's not super clear. So as far as the addressing equity piece,
Yeah, I think that at the very beginning of this presentation, we highlighted the equity concepts that Blueprint Denver contains and how we can be using those in our evaluation of rezonings. And then also keeping in mind that our third joint session later this summer is really going to be focused on, now that we've narrowed down the criteria, how do we effectively incorporate equity and public input into them? So I think that's something that we're going to have a better answer to next time as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think for everything we look at, considering the who, or, whose community needs is, I think it's gonna need to, there's going to need to be a series of questions, is what I'm trying to get at. Because when we say community need, who's usually prevail and who's usually don't even get asked or answered.
So Joe, Caitlin?
So I've been a little quiet because I serve as several others in the room on the Advancing Equity Rezoning Task Force. So I already got to give some feedback to them, so I didn't want to repeat it. But I did want to chime in here more in that I think that this is the right direction to go with the or. I think sometimes there's a little bit of gymnastics on trying to do both when it's unnecessary. If it's clearly consistent with adoptive plans, why are we talking about the other stuff? I do think keeping the former chapter 59 is relevant. I get that most of the time it should be consistent with adoptive plans as well, but I think to your point, I think it signals to the community, it's the desire to continue to move out of former chapter 59. And that is an important value to kind of continue to resonate and talk about. And then I think you're right, Angel, when we talk about community, I think it's going to be a little subjective and really up to planning board and city council, who is that community, and for them to really reflect on, is this, and kind of gives this objective that we maybe want to see of, is this enhancing a community need or not? So I think that could be a good thing for kind of the flexibility for that council person to really have that reflection and determine if that's the case. So I think generally in the right direction, maybe some tweaks on some of the justified circumstances.
This one we go more than nice.
Thank you. I'm a little, I'm tracking what we're trying to do, but I keep coming back to, and thank you, Councilmember Sawyer, for bringing up Pepsi. Because Pepsi was never contemplated in the Far Northeast plan. It was that CPD staff came to me and said, hey, there's this opportunity. We want to open up the plan and we're going to put the steering committee back together. But it was a truncated process. And I know where CPD staff was coming from because it was jobs diversity. Pepsi is a huge employer. But the kicker on that is this Pepsi plant is high tech. And so those jobs are most likely computer science or a higher skill level job. So I was trying to negotiate behind the scenes saying, well, Pepsi, tell me how many people from the community you're gonna hire. Tell me that you're going to start an outreach and education plan, and can people get upskilled at Community College of Aurora? How do we make this not just look good on paper, but actually hold water and do what it's supposed to do? There's nothing that I can compel them to do in that way. And then I learned a lot about truck traffic. So the reason on, York Street, it's always rutted up and everything is because there are semi-truck trailers going up and down. And we're gonna have over 300 of them at just the Pepsi site. That doesn't count Coca-Cola as well. And again, I wish I could have compelled Pepsi or Coke that any intersections that they were going to build out must be built out with cement, because cement, that's why Pena Boulevard is cement the whole way. Otherwise, you would have asphalt ruts. There was nothing that I could get to compel them to do that either. And so it might look good on paper, but I guess where it really plays out, and like I can see Council Pro Tem Sandoval, like what you're trying to do in your neighborhood, give it a few years, and if we don't fix this, that's gonna be Montbello at the same time. So how we can have these agreements, the subjective part of how are you really going to implement? One, do you understand what equity is? And two, how are you going to long-term implement that sustainability with the community?
Councilman.
It's two things, I think. First, it's error or mistake. Whose error or mistake? And the reason I bring this up is, like if it's one plot, that's one thing. So like what Councilmember Sawyer said about one of the examples in the first bit. But I also don't want it to be misused. And we have a process for fixing errors or mistakes. Like in Council District 7, Joel and Clark brought in a correction blueprint for a neighborhood. And that went through, they realized right as getting close to the end of the adoption process that it was an error or mistake. We fixed it through a community process. And so if we're doing one plot or we're doing a neighborhood, I just want to make sure that that when we don't, that's used for good and not for evil, I guess. And then one other thing that I wanted to bring up, I want to make sure that this applies to the last conversation too, that got it.
Okay. Ready?
So this comment is sort of similar to the one I made on the last report, I suppose. There is, I think this is moving in the right direction. I like that it provides flexibility where some flexibility, something you said, the gymnastics, or whoever said that, doing the gymnastics to make one work and trying to force the other one to work, applying guidance. So I like the flexibility here. There is, I think, again, the flexibility, depending on who you are, could be too much. Going to its furthest possible, I don't even know if this is the furthest possible extent, but just as an example, say someone comes in with a rezoning for greater intensity or density than adopted plans recommend. Home district. I would say that, okay, it doesn't meet the consistent plans, we use our OR. Change or changing conditions. From my perspective, that allows us to zone every single residential because the changing conditions, we have a housing crisis and it's only getting worse, right? So I think that opens the floodgates, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing personally, to say that basically all our low density housing, anyone who comes with the rezoning to make it less low density has, justification to do so.
Thank you for that. Is the thinking then if it's not consistent with adopted plans, is it not because it isn't in there or because it is directly counter to the adopted plan language?
I'm not sure I track exactly. So like, it's not in the plan.
If we have an or, if it is
Yeah.
either consistent with adopted plans.
Right.
Or you seek for justifying circumstances.
Correct, yeah.
Would you move to or because consistency doesn't exist? Because it's not in there or because it's directly in conflict? Absence or conflict, I guess.
Maybe both, potentially. If there's something that's not, that it's not in there, maybe just be.
Well, I think
Definitely if it's in conflict, right? That is the definite, yes, like that's when the or would play. Maybe I'm trying to think of a situation where it would just be missing. Like if there's just like not a newer plan and there's just not guidance.
Well, I think a really clear example of that is kind of what happened in the West area where we had a lot of plans from the 90s that didn't anticipate the development of RTD stations throughout the neighborhood. And we knew that we wanted to focus density at those rail stations. So I think in that example, we would want to use something that is going against plan guidance and use a justifying circumstance to get the zoning in place that actually meets the need of the community and that we've seen a change or change condition in.
That's from the 80s.
80s.
Retro. Yeah. Anyone else? Sorry.
Yeah, I guess I agree, because I have some concerns about this. I think this is good. I think we're much closer on this one than we are on the first one. I think the question of the plans and their accuracy, it should still be considered here, because like, for example, we had a rezoning a couple of months ago, and I think it was in Cole.
Was in Curtis Park.
It was in Curtis Park, that's right, so you
Don't
know
remind me.
exactly what I'm talking about, right? Where like, if it's not consistent with the adopted plans, why is it in front of council? It should never have made it as far as council. But this one did. I voted no on it because it was not consistent with the adopted plans. And just because we didn't like the adopted plans doesn't mean that the adopted plans don't exist. But it ended up there and, it was a rough one. So because the Curtis Park adopted plan and Blueprint Denver are in conflict with each other, directly in conflict with each other. This is real and it is true and it is right now. So I just, I am a little bit concerned because I'm not sure, even if you go to or, and then there's a justifying circumstance that exists, I'm not sure how you would ever say no to a rezoning in that case. Everything would be a yes. Everything would be a yes. So I just don't understand how, like, then let's just not do rezonings and CPD can do it all. Like, I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to
I agree.
thread the needle there, right?
Well, and I don't know why we would not, why we would move to the second, as
Yeah.
opposed to just giving them a multiple choice application, right, and saying you could be this or this, if you argue it well enough, right? Why wouldn't it be consistent with adopted plans is I think what I keep going back to before you can move to the or. Yeah, Gosha.
I think I'm
Mary, oh, Mary, yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I love these conversations because I think I know how I feel. And get me mixed up. I guess my question that I have with this, and I think I lean still with sentiments Jordan was expressing of like feeling like we're on the right track. The thing I'm not sure about, or that's giving me a little bit of heartburn, is when things are in conflict. And so maybe it's not consistent with adopted plans, but the plans lay out like a really good environmental angle on it. But there's a changing community need that addresses the overwhelming housing need. So then, as somebody who's making a decision on this and I'm weighing those different priorities, like, how do I sort that out if we go to an or?
You're asking if, well, I think it would be if it's consistent or can be found, if you can find that it's consistent with the adopted plans, I think that's the way.
But if there's a proposal that's saying, we don't, we're gonna upzone this and it's gonna address a big housing need in a place where it's not zoned for that. And I mean, this is a really terrible example, I apologize, but so it's like, this is a justifying circumstance that we need to deal with. But it's on a parcel that's providing a lot of green space and reducing the urban heat island. Like, does that make sense?
Yes, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's a good conflict. I don't think I have an answer for it.
Okay.
That is, yeah, because I see what you're saying. If there's a conflict between the need that they're proposing, but it would be more consistent for the planning guidance that they just left it as the current use
Right.
is or something along those lines. Yeah,
Right.
That's a great consideration. Yeah, I don't think I have an answer. Stumped.
Very, go Shed and Rachel.
Yeah, so, I want to talk a little bit about the changing conditions because change is only constant. I don't see a scenario under which our city is not changing or any city is not changing. It's either growing or shrinking and there's always change happening. So I think it's important to qualify the change, like the change we're seeing right now is displacement. So maybe that's not a good change. So we should qualify, is it the change that we want versus the change we don't want? And again, frame it in the concept of equity. What is rezoning produce more equitable outcomes, as opposed to just kind of a blanket statement about the change. And also the last bullet, community need, this one also gives me concerns because there's a very fine line between a need and a want. And I think obviously right now we're in a refugee crisis, so there's an evident need that we're trying to address, but I can possibly anticipate a condition where there might be a community want that may kind of want to stretch into the need category and justify the outcomes that maybe are not documented in adopted plans. That's why I think I kind of tend to gravitate back to adopted plans. I think we do have needs and priorities and goals specified in the plans. And I think we can kind of rely on them rather than just kind of, again, arbitrary need.
Thanks, Goshen. I've got Rachel, then Watson, then Hines, and then Caitlin, and then Andrew, I'll kick it to you to wrap up.
So I do think we're on the right track here, and Councilman Sawyer, hear what you're saying, but I can think of a lot of proposals that would be inconsistent with adopted plans and would not meet a justifying circumstance. So if somebody wanted to rezone across from Wash Park to industrial zoning to allow for an oil refinery, I don't think that would, I don't think that would check either.
Actually, our zoning code doesn't allow that, but yes.
And I do think that there are examples where there could be a new entrant to the market or a need that we didn't know that we had 5 years ago when the plan was adopted, whether that's from an employment opportunity or a housing opportunity, or we see that, hey, where we put, or I don't know, we don't have anybody in downtown offices anymore. And we say the plan called for all these offices, but we actually need housing. And so we need this justifying circumstance, even though the plan may have been adopted in 2019, it may be a very, very recent plan, but we have a change that's, sort of, we unanimously agree that housing makes more sense here than an office that we thought in 2019 made sense. I do think that the or gives some of that flexibility and wiggle room.
Watson?
And I'll reflect back on what Sawyer said, and it wasn't just, there was conflict in the plan. The 2011 Curtis Park plan spoke to density, it spoke to use, but the same folks that did the Curtis Park plan in 2011 they were, I think, one of the chairs, co-chairs, or one of the whoever for the Blueprint Denver, and they specifically had a discussion about the Curtis Park plan as it transitions towards Lawrence Street from coming from Lodo towards Larimer, Lawrence, and how that transition from height and density would curve back into Curtis Park residential. That was a direct discussion within the Blueprint Denver discussion in 2019. And they made a change in 2019 in reflection of what was missing in the 2011 plan. And we've had two big rezonings, Eden and then this little small one, that has created, a ruckus, because we still have Curtis Park plan being listed as one of the adopted plans, and it directly conflicts with Blueprint, but there is no way of communicating a change in conditions that Blueprint specifically had that dialogue, had that discussion of that conflict of height, and it wasn't even going beyond 3 stories. It just wasn't pure residential. That small zoning, it was a boutique hotel that was 3 stories, and it would have some commercial little niche people could use, only the people in the hotel could use it. But Curtis Park explicitly said, must be residential. You could do a row house at the same time.
And remember though, that also, that just to add to that, Blueprint says, look to the neighborhood plan.
Correct.
And that's the
That was-
problem, when the
that's-
neighborhood plan and Blueprint are not consistent
Yeah.
with each other, and Blueprint says, look to the neighborhood plan, that's
So
the
that was
problem.
the explosion
Yeah.
there, and I think we have so many more of those. So when we have that or, it has to be an explicit, what was that change and why? And that's where that or is giving me a little consternation, because even though it was an explicit change in Blueprint based on the conflict in Curtis Park, Blueprint still directs you back to Curtis Park. And so we're going to continue to have fights with anything coming when it comes to height or use from lower downtown into the art district, into the Curtis Park neighborhood. Anything on Lawrence and Larimer, that fight is still there. And we are looking at other zonings where that, and planning approves those because they're looking at Blueprint, because it is, I'm assuming, it's the most recent. And that's where that difficulty is coming in. So I think we're going in the right direction, but that or gives me some consternation, especially in District 9, because we have some of those conflicts. Elyria plan for stuff that people think is in Clayton plan for folks that doesn't have a plan, but people think it's in Elyria, conflict. And so it's concerning a little bit.
We are at time. I
Sorry.
recognize some folks probably have things to get to. But Councilman Hines and Caitlin, do you want to say your piece quickly
Yeah.
before we wrap up?
So my thought was, community feedback and anticipated plan is good because it shows that we are listening to community and we're advocating on behalf of community. But it could be used again as a, for bad. So that was kind of my.
Okay.
Yeah, my only addition is, I think the intent around justified circumstance, which needs to be added, is it's really exceptional. I don't see it being the example, and I think we need to not go into the example you gave, Jordan, of everything's changing, right? I think
Your lawyer's nodding.
it needs to be exceptional.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Andrew.
Great, thank you all so much. Discussion, really appreciate you bringing your experiences with your constituents or hearing cases and planning board to this discussion. As Brandon mentioned earlier, we will be scheduling at least one more of these joint meetings. We'll talk about proposing to bring in the rezoning process. Also want to highlight, just acknowledge we didn't get to the many open forums today. We ran out of time, so if you have other comments you want to make, you're more than welcome to email them to us. I think you all, I'm sure, have my contact information, I'm sure with Brandon's as well. And we're happy to add that to the mix of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brandon.
Thanks, guys. I'm not making it to the library thing. I haven't. I'm feeling extremely overwhelmed with all the things on my plate right now.
Yeah, I know.
I know how much I want to go see all of them.
Are you guys clear?
Yeah, we asked